Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction and thank you for having me. My name is Frances. I am from the Manhattan TCAC. We have one in every borough. Let me just start sharing my slides. So, does everyone see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, let me move this out the way. All right. So at TCAC, essentially, our mission is to support families, schools by facilitating a seamless transition for our students from school to adult life. All students are provided with experiences that foster their academic, social, emotional, and vocational growth, excellence, facilitating multiple pathways to graduation and success after high school. Here are some of our goals and
I don't mean to interrupt you. The presenter view is actually blocking your presentation.
Oh, let me stop this then. Okay, no, thank you so much for, it's hard to see what everyone can see.
Okay. Yes,
you're okay. All right, let me stop this then. And let me redo it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, let me see. Bear with me 1 minute. Let me end the show. All right. How was this?
Perfect.
Perfect. All right. So here are some of our goals. We provide work-based learning and other vocational opportunities. We work with community-based organizations, and throughout the presentation, I'll let you know what these organizations are. We provide access to college and career learning experiences that will support attainment and/or graduation, diploma requirements, and credential options. We train school staff on the administration of age-appropriate transition assessments to inform student-centered transition planning. We engage families in the transition planning process through family-centered workshops and information sessions. And finally, we develop and lead ongoing professional development for staff in the area of college and career readiness and transition planning services. Essentially, at the Transition College and Access Centers, we are a concierge service for students with disabilities in all 5 boroughs. I am personally from the Manhattan. I work at the Manhattan borough, but we have an office in every one. We have Staten Island, Manhattan, Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn offices. And the office that you would reach out to is in the borough that your child attends school. So if you live in Brooklyn, but your child attends a school in Manhattan, you would reach out to my office. I hope that was made clear for everyone, and I'll repeat it again. So this is just an overview of what I'm going to be discussing. All the services that we offer at TCAC, our employment services, as well as our pre-employment services. We do a lot of community connections, transition consultancies. I'm going to explain everything as we go along. We do work-based learning experiences. We have TOP, which is our training opportunities program, as well as SYEP, which is our summer youth employment program. Those applications have ended, but TOP is coming up in the fall. And then finally, we have what's called our pre-ETS, which is our pre-employment training program. I will explain what those services are, the application, and how that aligns with Access VR. Okay, so when we're thinking about hopes, dreams, and aspirations for our students, we ideally like to start with elementary school to get students thinking about what their interests are. And if they're not able to explain that, we like to observe as family members. And I'm speaking as a mother of a child who is OPWDD eligible currently. So I'm speaking from firsthand experience. As a mom, as well as a professional, it's good to see what our children's interests are right now and to help them align that with future professions or any interests and hobbies that they can build upon that can create employment opportunities for them. And then we want to look at what's occurring to make that change. Is it changing over time? What does that look like? Are we supporting their interests? Are we taking away from their interests? What are we doing as family members to help our children start really developing hobbies and interests that can lead to skills. Okay. And then we finally are going to look at what are your son's daughter's strengths, skills, or current abilities. Okay. Transition is a results-oriented process that is focused on improving the academic and functional achievement of the student with a disability to facilitate the student's movement from school to post-school activities. So when we say results-oriented, we're looking at what is this child going to be able to do and what do they need to help them do this. That's what we mean by results-oriented. And post-school outcomes activities include, but are not limited to, continuing our adult education, vocational training, employment, independent living, and community participation. And then finally, transition services are a coordinated set of activities for a student with a disability, designed with the focus on the desired outcome that are aligned in the measurable post-secondary goals. So this coordinated set of activities, these are our CTAs in the IEP. When we speak about coordinated set of activities, we're speaking in the future. The student will be attending college. The student will be attending a vocational program. When we speak about measurable post-secondary goals, this is how the student is going to obtain these goals in the future. What are they doing now to, let's say, get into a vocational program? How are we as family members and the school preparing them now? So when you come to TCAC for a transition consultancy, we review the IEP with the parent. We do not do compliance. We do not suggest what somebody should write in an IEP. We help the parent understand the IEP to better support their child. We also work with the D75 schools, the teachers, the principals, et cetera, to make sure that everything is streamlined and we're not suggesting anything that cannot be supported in the school as well as at home. All right, so this is just a brief outline of the law, Individuals with Disability Education Act, otherwise known as IDEA, or some people say IDEA. It requires the students with disabilities receive a free and appropriate education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for future education, employment, and independent living. We discuss this because a lot of our parents were unaware that the services and supports required under law in the IEP during high school does not transfer after high school. And we want to make that very clear to parents so they have an understanding of how to plan now. So the IEP has to do with what supports the students are eligible for while in school. Okay, and this is, I'm not going to go over it, but this is when you receive the slide. You can all know what the 14 disability classifications are currently under IDEA, meaning currently this is what the federal government recognizes as disabilities that can receive, who people with these disabilities can receive specific supports. All right, so we have IDEA versus ADA. We can look at it as IDEA is what our children are entitled to while the services that our children are entitled to while they are in school. And ADA are services that they are entitled to and eligible for after school. However, they must advocate, or we as parents must advocate as much as we can on behalf of our students, because these are not guaranteed. So ADA services are not guaranteed. It means that your students, your children are eligible for it, but it does not mean they're going to get these services. Whereas IDEA, they are entitled to these services. Is my cursor, is everybody able to see my mouse or cursor, or no? Okay, I want to make, thank you so much, thank you. All right, so we see here IDEA, this is what our students are entitled to, whereas ADA, this is what they're eligible for. Okay, so entitlement is based on IDEA. This means things like speech and occupational therapy or physical therapy or any services that are in the IEP. It guarantees access to education. Now, our students graduate from school, they've aged out. Now we move to ADA, eligibility. They must apply for services and supports. And then these levels of supports are determined by outside entities. For instance, let me go back. For instance, if you have a child who is going to college, when they come to TCAC, the first thing that we do if the student has been accepted to college, let's say, the first thing we help the students and the families do is contact the offices of accessibility or disability, or some of them call them student support centers or student support services. These are various names for the same thing. Your child now must go to these offices with their current IEP, meaning the most current or recent IEP that they have after they left school, and be able to say, I need these services. Again, this is where we come into eligibility. The school is not required anymore to provide these services. They will determine what services your child can get. I know in some CUNY schools like LaGuardia Community College, they provide one-on-one support. Students get extended time. They get on exams. They get to take exams in a separate location. They also get a scribe. They get someone to sit there and write notes with them or help them organize notes. These are services that we provide at TCAC where we do the research and we're able to tell families this school does this. But I'm speaking to entitlement and eligibility because I don't want parents to be shocked when your student ages out and you're saying, how come my child is no longer receiving these services? Okay. So this is just a brief overview of transition and how it starts in elementary school, leading to middle school and high school. By law, we must start a level 1 vocational assessment by the age of 12. With this assessment, let me show you my cursor. Age of 12. Essentially, this just helps students identify some of their interests, right? What are you interested in? What do you like to do so far? And then when the student turns the age of 15, right? This is when they are now in high school, and these goals and services that align with transition, like I mentioned before, the coordinated set of activities, as well as the measurable post-secondary goals, should be in the IEP starting the year your child turns 15. So if they are currently 14 and their IEP meeting is in June, but they're turning 15 in July, you should see in their IEP some notes about their measurable post-secondary goals and the coordinated set of activities. And these notes will come directly from the student's interests, as well as those of the family members, okay? And then starting in high school, we have opportunities to participate in internships, work-based learning activities, and other employment activities. We also have credential opportunity services we'll speak to later. We partner students and families with external agencies like OPWDD, like the coordinated care management services, front door services. We help families really plan all of that and execute all of that. We determine if travel training is appropriate, and we explore and apply for college, vocational, and other programs with the families. Okay, so when you come to TCAC and we say we're going to create a transition plan, these are all the entities that we think about, okay? Employment, recreation and leisure, transportation. Does your child need travel training? Do they know how to get from their school to home on their own? Do they know how to get from, let's say, their school to any type of employment? We ask these questions. Education and training, what is your child eligible for? May I add, we do have some programs for students who are classified with intellectual disabilities, there are college programs that they are actually eligible for. And we just in CUNY schools, and we discuss this with parents, okay? Community living, self-advocacy, and independence. Self-advocacy is at the top of our list because, as I stated before, according to the ADA, your children after they graduate are not eligible for certain services unless we advocate for them or teach them how to advocate for themselves. So this is just an overview of what we go over and all the boxes that we check when we meet for transition consultancy. How am I doing on time, by the way?
You're fine.
Okay, thank you so much. All right. So we have the transition services at TCAC, right? So we start with the transition consultancy. I'm going to go over what are they. We do self-advocacy and self-determination training for children. We also have workshops for students, families, and staff. Okay, our transition consultancies are for students with IEPs who need to be connected with adult or post-secondary services or instruction, but otherwise, recently completed school will be offered transition support consultancy services. So we provide services for students who are currently in school, as well as for students who are not in school, who have graduated or who are in between, so to speak. So we do have 21 plus assistance that we give to students. Our transition support consultancy services are individualized services. So these are not group settings. This is always one-to-one. When we meet with students, we have already reviewed, if they are in school, we have thoroughly reviewed their IEPs. We have spoken to the principal, the assistant principal, if there's a transition coordinator. We have already spoken with all these entities and the parents prior to meeting with the students. So we come with a wealth of knowledge of how to support the student. And when we meet, we're essentially sitting down to assess what are the needs. And we need to meet with the student because we need student voice. It's very important that we have student voice. Now, when we discuss student needs, employment, for instance, we connect some of our students with agencies like Bridges from School to Work, which is an independent agency that works solely on behalf of students with disabilities to find them employment, and not just temporary employment, permanent employment. They provide training. They work with the students from A to Z. They have long-standing relationships with the students. This is an organization that has been around for 30 plus years. They started out in Chicago, and now they have offices in New York. Currently, we have placed 100 students this year. By this year, I mean from September to May, we have placed 100 students who are now actively employed. We also placed 101 when we were all remote from that year 2020 to 2021 with Bridges. In terms of education, if students want to be eligible for vocational programs or colleges, we do not help with the application process, meaning we sit with a child to apply. We help with gathering whatever documentation they will need. We help the students create a Gmail account if they don't already have one, and we show them how to upload their documents into a Google Drive so they have these documents for life. Their IEP, their 504s, anything related to their needs and supports. We help these students put it in Google Drive. We also help them with a digital resume. We help them apply to jobs. In terms of independent living, we help students who are OPWDD eligible access other organizations like Synergia, which provides habilitation services, respite services, etc. Okay, so here are some sample transition consultancy topics: career paths for employment, college and vocational training, housing options. These are the things I mentioned before. Financial wellness programs. We currently have a professional development opportunity for students and families where we invite attorneys who help parents create special needs trust or just teach them about a special needs trust. We also have people who work in banks who help parents and students learn about opening up a savings account and all these other financial supports. We discuss self-advocacy and self-determination, which I'm going to speak to later. Align with agencies that support other domains of transition, Access VR, OPWDD support, Americans with Disabilities Act education. I did give a glimpse of that, but when we meet with families and students one-on-one, we discuss more about what that means, and college accessibility offices, which I mentioned earlier. So these are all the topics that we discuss when we go over a transition consultancy. They usually last at least an hour if we are going to go over all of this information. They can be in person or they can be conducted remotely. And if another language other than English is needed, we do offer that service. We do offer translators. Okay, so what is self-advocacy? This is why this is important. This is why we're discussing this. We help our students speak up for themselves. We also help our families learn how to speak on behalf of their children. We help our children know what their rights and responsibilities are and reaching out to others when they need help or friendship. This is especially important when we're helping our children in terms of employment. We are not going to be at their jobs with them. So how are they going to advocate for themselves? How are they going to ask for help? How are they going to say, I need extra supports? And this is what we do following our transition consultancies. So we'll have our consultancies, but it doesn't stop there. We continue the services. And then we have self-determination. We help our children believe in themselves and know what their interests are and help them align their interests with their future goals. We help them see the small steps. So that's executive functioning that we were talking about earlier. We help our students plan out and organize their steps. We help them know what supports that they may need to help them take control of their lives. Some of these things can include deciding what to wear, how to spend their free time, or where to work. Currently, well, most recently, we worked with a group of students who either had autism or ID, and they are now all employed. This is really great. They're all able to speak to what their interests are. They have done some career assessments with us, and we had one student who wanted to be a software designer, saw what that entailed, and now the student is currently enrolled in a program that they're learning more about software security systems. Okay, so through our support and working with the schools and the families, we're able to help students figure out what it is that they're interested in and align this interest with actual employment and or education. Okay, so I'm just going to go over this quickly. These are some of the workshops that we cover. So with students, we go over college considerations. By that, we mean what grades do you need? What colleges are out there? How much do they cost? What is the cost to family members? What is the cost to you? Where are the Office of Accessibility or Disability offices? How are you going to speak up for yourself in class? How are you going to speak up for yourself if you need to go to these offices? How do we make friends? How do we sustain relationships? We go over interview skills and of course the digital resume that I mentioned earlier. With families, we discuss post-secondary funding options like FAFSA and other things like the special need trust and things that I mentioned before. We also discuss rehabilitation and rehabilitation organizations and digital resume as well. With our staff. Now, we also train staff in transition planning, specifically in the transition areas of the measurable post-secondary goals and the coordinated set of activities. Remember, the CTAs are what your children will be able to do, and the measurable post-secondary goals are how they're going to get there. We also provide culturally responsive transition planning for staff. And this is where we help staff include the cultural needs of the families and be quite sensitive to their circumstances. Okay, so in the area of employment, as I mentioned before, the summer youth employment applications have been closed, and coming up in the fall, we will have TOP, otherwise known as Training Opportunities Program, and it is a work-based learning experience designed to support schools in providing work-based learning experiences that align with students' measurable post-secondary goals. So this is work that students do at school. This is quite amazing. I know in some schools, specifically the high schools, the students run, let's say like a little shop where they sell snacks to the teachers and other students. Well, they can get paid for things like this. Sometimes students are there before school starts and they collect maybe like the attendance sheets and they distribute it to each teacher. So with each school, they design what the work is, but this is really important for students to have this opportunity. They really enjoy it. They love that level of responsibility. They love being needed, and they love knowing that they have a skill that makes them employable. This also adds to their resume, right? I worked, I did this, these are what my skills are. And when our students are active in TOP or SYEP, we help them see what their specific skills are so they can be able to verbally express that in their interviews, let's say, as well as write it down in their resume, okay? So when it will open up again in September, and the applications will close in December, by December 1st. We have our pre-employment training services. These are great services. I find them to be great. They're for students ages 14 to 21. They must have a current IEP or 504 plan. This program I find really wonderful because it's in group settings as well as one-to-one services for students to help them figure out, what am I going to do if I have a job? How am I going to speak to my employees? If I'm at work, am I going to have my cell phone out all day and look at my cell phone? If I'm working at Target, let's say, and someone asks for help, will I be able to help them, or will I be able to, will I run away? Will I shy away? We have all of these great conversations. We do a lot of mock interviews. We actually invite employers into some of the sessions to talk about what they're looking for with students. And these sessions take place after school. They are fully remote. Students create their schedules with their teachers. It's offered in English, French, and Spanish. We are looking to offer it in different languages as it expands. And this is a really great program. We do field trips as well once things are fully operating. And this is a really wonderful experience. We practice self-advocacy, workplace readiness, how do you dress to work, post-secondary training, and job and career exploration, as well as the work-based learning piece that I spoke about. I really love this program. Our students who are currently in this really appreciate the ability to speak to people one-to-one, as well as speak to other students about what working is like and how am I going to behave. And they speak through their fears and their anxieties and their concerns. All right, now these are just some links to other agencies and entities that we support families with. We have Include NYC, Bridges is the employment company, Opportunities for a Better Tomorrow, Brooklyn Educational Opportunity Center, the CUNY Disability Services for those who have children who are going to college. This brings you to the front door for OPWDD. Access VR, and Pathways to Graduation for students who need more support in getting a high school diploma. These are our other links here. Advocates for Children that we work with, and D79 programs. And here's our link to our professional catalog, our pre-ETS application. And if you want a transition consultancy, here's a link to request that from all 5 boroughs. And this is just a nice little reflection quote. Without a healthy sense of control, kids feel powerless and overwhelmed and will often become passive or resigned. When they are denied the ability to make meaningful choices, they are at high risk of becoming anxious, struggling to manage anger, becoming self-destructive, or self-medicating. So we always bring this reflection quote up to really help parents, such as myself, really make sure that we are making our students at the center of our choices, because it really is all about them. All right, so any questions?
Yes.
Is this the question time?
Yes, this is the question time. Thank you so
Perfect.
much, Francis.
Thank you.
So we're just gonna repeat the instructions a little bit, because we just want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to ask a question. So if you have a question and you have not spoken yet, we ask that you raise your hand or you put it in the chat. And then those that have asked questions, you're feel free to ask questions as well. We just want to make sure that this space is open for everyone. Please don't be shy to ask a question. There's never a wrong answer to anything, or a bad question. So Chrissy M. or Craig, is there any questions in the chat? We will take one from there, and then if there's a raised hand, we'll take another one from after that. And Francis, if you want to just stop your sharing, it would be really nice to see the community.
No worries.
Together. Thanks.
Thank you.
I see a hand raised, but Christy, do we have any chat questions? I know you've been chatting.
I don't see any at this time.
Okay, so we can just go to the hand raised.
What was that? Audrey's iPad. I'm gonna go ahead and
Hi, Dr. Francis. Thank you so much. That was so much information. Do we make appointments to come in?
Yes. So you'll get I believe you'll get I'll give it to Christy, I believe, a PDF version of the PowerPoint, which will have live links and you can click on everything. You can either call our offices or you'll see a form to request a transition consultancy.
Fantastic.
And this can be done remotely. You don't actually have to come to the office if you don't want to.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, and we do offer evening hours for transition consultancies because we understand that we have to be flexible.
You guys thought of everything.
We try.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
No worries.
I have a question for you, Francis.
Yes.
What resources are available to support the students to receive eligible vouchers and benefits to support individuals with disabilities for independence?
What do you mean by vouchers?
Just different services. You know how with with the brokers, with the front door, there's certain things where it can be paid for without the money in the parent's pocket, etc.
So here's what we do, and because I'm a parent and I understand the process, what I first advise parents to do is collect all the documents. It is a very long process and it can get longer if you do not have everything. So at TCAC, we help the parents collect the documents. We also connect them with a coordinator care manager who then takes over from us and does all the rest of the support services. So in terms of vouchers, I can never say you're going to get this. All I can tell parents is you may be eligible for this. Right. And then I can give them firsthand knowledge, having a child who is OPWDD eligible, who's fairly young. I can say because of my son's age, he's 4 years old. He's only eligible currently for this services. That can be, I can have somebody who can come to our home and help him with speech services, et cetera, et cetera. As he gets older, the levels of support change and OPWDD determines that. And this is what I share with families. So they don't, they're not disappointed when OPWDD says, hey, we don't believe based on your child's level of need that you need this, that, and the third. What I do impress upon parents is to say before the front door process, to highlight what you know you're going to need. And we do give them a list of services so they know how to verbally say it and try to get that going in on the front end.
Thank you for that. Do we have any further questions in the chat, Craig or Christy?
I didn't see.
Yes, I actually got someone might have messaged me directly instead of to everyone. So I'm just gonna read that question. Just bear with me.
Okay.
Is self-direction a better option for services TCAC provides?
I'm unclear as what that means. Is self-direction a better option?
I'm
unclear as to what the parent is asking.
Audrey, are you able to maybe unmute and elaborate on your question?
Raise your hand so I could see. So I don't see any hands. Was it the same Audrey that asked? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, there it is.
Audrey, are you able to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you
Yes.
now.
Okay, I apologize. I don't know what just went wrong there. I know I'm hearing about self-direction.
Yeah.
We have a straight OPWDD waiver. So he gets all the other services. It comes through OPWDD.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to understand if I should try to do self-direction, would that provide more opportunities in terms of what I can get for him, or do I just stick with OPWDD the way it is?
I would advise the self-direction. It does give you more options and more control over what you can choose and who you can choose.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
We have a hand up from Joanne. Joanne, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I am now. Good afternoon. I have a question in relation to working papers and a program that's surrounded around having a shadow mentor with, if they are allowed to be employed, do you have a program that offers a shadowing mentor? If they do get employed at a job, there's usually someone that mentors them, that works alongside of them, et cetera. So my two questions are, do you offer any assistance around working papers? Because I was told that is needed. And secondly, is there a program that you can, or your consulting firm offers in relation to assistance while working, if they do get employed, transitional students?
Right. Okay. So in terms of working papers, if the child is currently in school, that has to be done through school. We are a DOE office, but we are not allowed to distribute or help students with working papers. That has to be done through school. And that is because of the medical physical required, or the medical forms required to receive working papers. I know for the older age group that has been waived, but for the younger age group, meaning 14 to 15, a medical form is still required, and that has to be collected from the school. I don't know which entities in the school does that. Sometimes it's parent coordinators, sometimes it's transition coordinators. So that you would have to find out from the school themselves. What was the second part? Is she able to unmute? Joanne?
Joanne, are you able to unmute yourself?
Okay, now I am. It was a little shaky there, but thank you. So the second part to my question was around any programs that you can offer.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we don't offer the programs. We align students with a program. So it's called Bridges from School to Work. And they do have a mentoring program where they offer pre-employment services as well as not current, they help the students while they're currently employed. They do not go to the job, but they do speak with their employer, and they have an open line of communication to make sure that the child is doing well at work. And this is until the child decides they no longer want the assistance. So there's no expiration date on the support.
Okay, that's perfect. I appreciate those answers. Now, this is just one last caveat to what I was asking. My son already has a virtual resume, which is most of the studies and programs that he's doing is within the school, within his transitional program, leading him up to once he transitions. So the virtual resume is already there. I just have to work on getting the working papers through the school, you're saying, because they never even mentioned that. So I appreciate that.
Oh, no worries. Thank you.
We are going to go back to the question about self-direction. So I'm gonna let Christy support in, if possibly, answer that question. She in her professional career does self-direction. So Christy, you can support that.
She's a transition committee chair.
Hi, everyone. So yes, in my professional career, I am a self-direction broker. So I do have extensive knowledge on self-direction. So I'll just give a brief definition. I don't want to get, because we could be here all day talking about self-direction. I would love for our transition committee to host another session on self-direction. We did have one in March, which was very, very thorough, but I think, it's always something that's needed. So I'll definitely get that set up again with the transition committee. So self-direction is basically a term for when you have Medicaid waiver, which a lot of you have your waiver enrolled, you can choose to self-direct those waiver services. And, there is a responsibility on the parent and advocate because it is self-direction. You're essentially going to be the director of your child services. And so instead of having your care manager handle all of those services, you and your broker and your care manager and your FI, you all form a circle of support, and you determine a budget for your child, basically, curated to all of their needs with your team. So you're in charge of the budget with your broker and your FI, and you handpick all the programs. There are rules and regulations, obviously, of what classes and services and rates for your staff and things like that. There's a lot of regulations you need to follow, but essentially you're making your own plan for your child, where you're hiring your own staff, deciding how many hours per week staff is going to work. You're deciding what programs, community classes you want your child to attend. And there's a lot of different categories of the budget. So like I said, I don't want to get into every category and what can be covered here, but I definitely highly recommend attending one of the OPWDD self-direction info sessions, as well, as they'll go over, everything that's available there. But there are a lot of opportunities to utilize your child's Medicaid waiver budget through self-directed.
Thank you so much, Christy. And we'll definitely continue the conversation of self-direction and how these services can benefit families as we continue to dive deep into it. I do want to, because we also have another session before we end this conference. So we want to make sure that, people are here leaving with knowing their rights. So just before we go to the next session, I wanted to just ask a question as to what is the supports and access for students and families that are interested in making sure that they have financial literacy before they look into any of these pathways toward independence and to post-secondary institutions. If you can share just a little bit, Francis, I think parents would just want to be more comfortable and have that foundation of skills moving forward.
Amy, were you asking me a question?
Yeah, around financial literacy. I know that TCAC does workshops, but what kind of access can students and families be able to get that?
What kind of access? So it's in our catalog. You can either call us, we can tailor it to a family group, like a PTA meeting or something like this, we can come back and speak like this. We would like more or less 4 weeks in advance notice, so we can invite attorneys, we can invite people who work in banks, or if we're not going to invite them, we just need a 2-week notice. And mostly the special needs trust is covered at length and all the options around that.
Thank you. And
worries.
will any of these areas of workshops be also in different languages? We also want to make sure that families who are multilingual language learners are part of the inclusiveness for information.
Right, because of the notice, I failed to mention that if you tell us we need these languages, we'll invite our DOE translators to the session.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We definitely don't want to make sure everyone's a part of this and that their journey through transitioning is a safe one, and also that they can have the supports they want.
Right.
Appreciate it.
Got one last little quick. You have the locations of the other TCAC and other boroughs, the addresses?
Yeah, when I will email Christy with my PDF of the PowerPoint, and it will have all 5 boroughs with the website links, phone numbers, and addresses.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
Christy, we will turn it over to you to moderate the next and last session. Appreciate it.
I was actually trying to drop the TCAC location, so give me a second. I can do that momentarily. Thank you so much, Francis. That was a great presentation. It was very empowering and a lot of knowledge and resources for our parents. I'm going to make sure that we get all of the different things that she has put into the chat out to our members of the audience here and to make them available online. So moving forward, our next session is knowing your legal rights and special needs planning. The speaker is Mrs. Orma MP Reynolds, Esquire. She is a special education law and children's advocate. And she is an attorney and has founded her own virtual law practice called MSR Legal and Consulting Services. Although she opened up her practice full-time in September 2019, she has been practicing special education law since 2008. Over the course of her career, Ms. MP Reynolds has worked for the Bronx Legal Services, the DOE, Garcio and Garcio, LLP, and Gersh Academy. She represents parents of children with disabilities in New York City, Long Island, and Lower Westchester. Amongst the issues addressed is Ms. MP Reynolds practice are least restrictive environments, student discipline, independent educational evaluations, private school tuition funding, compensatory education, and additional services. Consultations may be booked on her website, www.msrlegal.org, and we will also have her Instagram and other information that will be dropped into the chat shortly. And on that note, I will turn it over to Ms. MP Reynolds to move on and move forward with the session. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity, Ms. Angel, to address your citywide committee and, hopefully shed some light on some of the rights that parents do have with respect to the special education process. I'm going to share my screen so you can see my PowerPoint. I did email Ms. Angel the PowerPoint in case anyone would be interested in having a copy of it, but let me just see if this works. Share, and I'm gonna, from the beginning. Okay, are you guys able to see this PowerPoint?
Yes.
It's showing, okay, great. I'm not the most technologically advanced, but I am running a virtual practice. So yes, as Ms. Angel said, I'm the founder of a special education special needs law practice, MSR Legal and Consulting Services. Those initials MSR actually stand for my children's first names, Madison, Scarlett, and Riley, 2 of which have IEPs and 1 who is OPWDD eligible. When I started this working in this field, I wasn't a parent. I just kind of fell into it and fell in love with it. And now using the skills myself that I've learned over the past 14 years. So this first slide is just a list of all of the topics that I hope to cover. You know, I'm going to go through each one pretty quickly because of the time constraints, but each of these topics could be its own hour-long presentation. So just understand that I am touching the surface. And in terms of this presentation, I have some fine print on the bottom of my first intro slide that this is not considered legal advice. This is for, you know, general informational purposes, you know, community education for the public, and that there's no attorney-client relationship being formed by virtue of me, you know, responding to a specific question. I just have to give that disclaimer. So consent and confidentiality. So I start here because this is really where it all begins. And for all of the parents here that have children with IEPs, you should have been, you know, given informed consent of the evaluations and why they're being proposed and what the evaluation will look like of your child. It's important to note that consent to evaluate is not the same thing as consent to the provision of special education services. So it's really a two-part process, and you don't necessarily need to get to that second part. A lot of parents, you know, don't really realize it, and they're like, no, I don't even want to have my child evaluated or reevaluated. But it's interesting, this is embedded in the law and the commissioner's regulations covering children with special needs, that you know, you can consent to evaluation and not necessarily consent to the actual service. You know, of course, that not allowing the service to actually take place, let's say, you know, consenting to a speech evaluation, but not allowing your child to receive the actual speech therapy, of course, down the road, that can potentially pose issues if your child ends up struggling, and then now you're looking to figure out how to catch your child up. But those are definitely two different consents, and I do like to let families and, you know, individuals who help work with families know that consent to one is not necessarily consent to the other. Prior written notice is very, very important. So as you all know, you sit through the IEP meeting and you, you know, there's discussion, of course, about the different parts and what your child functioning levels are and what they need. But the prior written notice is really the DOE's kind of final notice of recommendations. It's usually accompanied by a school location letter for public school students, you know, 5 and up. And this is really what you will receive and know, okay, this is what the DOE is intending to offer my child as an appropriate set of programming and services based on the education. And another reason why that prior written notice is important is if you end up disagreeing with this, you know, ultimate recommendation, it's really just important to know what that recommendation is, and that is what the prior written notice, or PWN, does. And then, you know, a slightly controversial point, but I am in favor of giving families information and having them come to their conclusion. Families do have the right to revoke consent altogether to special education. In my 14 years, I've only seen it happen once, where a parent wanted to sort of decertify or declassify her child from special ed services, from IEP services, altogether. And of course, it's a huge decision and something that should not be taken lightly. And there could be potentially, you know, consequences again to taking that position. But you know, it's important to know, even though the Department of Education wouldn't be able to force you by, let's say, an impartial hearing against you to, you know, force a parent to continue with special education, there are potentially, you know, child welfare consequences that the parents should be made aware of. if the mandated reporter feels like the parent is sort of standing in the way of the child receiving an adequate education, and that's where education neglect referrals can happen. So language access, you have the right to meaningful participation in the CSC process, the Committee on Special Education's process of developing an IEP and finding the right school placement that can implement the IEP. So to that end, there should be translators at or an interpreter at the IEP meeting. The regulations say that districts should make every effort possible to make sure that the meetings are taking place in the parent's native language, if that would otherwise pose a barrier to the parent participating in the meeting. At an impartial hearing, which I'll go into later on, you do have the right to an interpreter at the expense of the Department of Education. And for your child, I see this with recent immigrants, there's the option of, or the option available of bilingual instruction and bilingual speech and language therapy. It's all based on your child's needs. And there are programs that do offer, I've seen, Spanish language and Mandarin, and there may be some other languages as well. So I like to think of language access not only for the parent, but also potentially for the child, him or herself. So this is a big one, the free appropriate public education. So we use this acronym, as you guys know, parents know, there are a lot of acronyms in special education, but this is the most important one, FAPE, the free appropriate public education. So we know free means that it should be at no cost to the parent. So just like you say your neighbor who has a child without a disability doesn't need to pay for her child to get a proper education, you as a special needs parent shouldn't have to pay either. So it's sort of like an equality or equitable thing with the no cost to the parent. Appropriate is where I do all of my litigation because it's so specific to the child. So there's a lot of case law, like judges' decisions that have molded what it means to be appropriate. But at its most basic level, the services have to be tailored to your child's needs. When I'm reviewing an IEP, I'm looking if the parent is telling me, their child is a non-speaking child, then I'm looking to see if there are, strategies and goals relating to functional communication or, things like assistive technology, and we'll get into that. But it's got to be tailored to your child's needs, right? It shouldn't be sort of a template form, in terms of the IEP. We should be looking at your child's functioning levels and seeing how we can help make that child make progress or demonstrate progress over usually a calendar year. Related services are very much a part of the appropriateness of the IEP. A related service is any service that a child needs in order to access or benefit from the instruction. So I put therapies because that's, a lot of us are really familiar with OT, PT, and speech therapy. But transportation is a related service as well. So the ability of your child to get from your home to the school is a related service. And so that's why certain IEPs have different transportation accommodations and, wheelchair lifts and a transportation aid. I even did a case where we had an aid that could bring the child from the door of their apartment down their walk up, because the child was in a wheelchair, and the parent and the home health aide weren't really able to do that kind of transportation. So, I put that there because it's really important. Also the length of the bus ride as well. Assistive technology, I see it most commonly in the context of communication, but under the law, it's it's broader than that. So I am working, for example, on a case where we're trying to look at assistive technology in assisting a child's mobility needs, and a certain chair, adaptive chair or adaptive stroller within the school environment to really enable that child to participate more fully in the instruction. And of course, nursing services, paraprofessional services, all of that has to, go into the child's ability to access and learn in the classroom. And appropriate means it has to be able to produce progress and not regression. And this may sound, like a really simple, like, a concept that, shouldn't be worth saying at all, but it is, because, we see IEPs where sometimes from year to year, it's not changing, and yet the child is still not making progress. And so, there was a relatively recent, like 5 years ago, a US Supreme Court case that talked about how, the district is on the hook here. You can't just kind of like copy and paste last year's IEP and keep it moving for this child who has not made progress. So something has to change, in the IEP, in this placement. And that case, it's called the Endrew case, ENDREW case. That's where the Supreme Court, US Supreme Court, talked about how the goals have to be challenging and ambitious in light of the child's circumstances. So it just we can't just be creating these IEPs just for the purpose of doing that without a real mission in mind, that we do want to see progress, see demonstrable academic or pre-academic progress or physical developmental progress in the child from year to year. And to that end, sometimes we do have to create goals that are going to push, not only the child, but the educators in the room to really help that child achieve what they should be achieving. Otherwise, the education will look more like, okay, this is just childcare. This is not, education, if we're not pushing the child in that right direction. And public education, it means it's aligned with grade level content standards for children who are in special classes. For example, it's, the grade level content standards have to be broken down and modified to a level that the child can understand and access. And then meaningful parental participation, I bring that up again. The Department of Education, just speaking, to you parents out there, has to afford you meaningful parental participation. So you shouldn't feel like you're walking into an IEP meeting where everything has already been thought up and planned out, even before you step foot or offered an opinion, and that you should feel that it's a space where you can voice your opinion. And I talk more about that on the next slide. So in terms of your rights with respect to the IEP, you have the right to share reports from outside providers. So often I see parents wanting to bring their outside, if they have private insurance and their child's getting ABA, applied behavioral analysis therapy, outside of school. Sometimes they'll bring that supervisor to talk at the IEP meeting. Sometimes they'll bring a prescription from their developmental pediatrician who's recommending a certain number of therapy sessions or a certain teaching methodology. I see that with my clients on the autism spectrum, but you do have the right to do that. And I encourage families, if they do have reports or outside information to share that has bearing on the child's education, to share that in advance, with whoever the administrator is for that IEP meeting. You also have the right to bring a family member, an advocate, an attorney, if you feel that's warranted. The law is really clear on that you can bring the support person or, team that you need, as long as they have, you know, specialized knowledge about your child, and can really serve as a productive member of this committee, the Committee on Special Education. And another thing, you're allowed to give suggestions on the goals. So sometimes the annual goals are glossed over, you know, by the parent, because it can seem like very heavy, like we're talking about like the number of times a child is going to do something within, you know, at 80% accuracy level within 4 months. It could sound all very technical, but nothing stops a parent or their advocate from saying, you know what, I don't really get all of these different terms that you're using, but I'm concerned that my child doesn't know the alphabet, you know, or I'm concerned that my child hasn't learned to pull down his pants at the potty, you know, and so I want a goal about that. And that's absolutely your right to raise your real world practical concerns in your own voice. And they are supposed to address it. That's what it's, you know, comes down to in terms of meaningful participation. In various sections of the IEP, there'll be like a parental concerns section. You know, for preschoolers, for example, it's kind of spread out between some of the different sections, you know, the parental concerns about physical development, academic development. And when I, you know, attend IEP meetings on behalf of clients and even for my own children, I can say, you know, please note in the parental concern section that I have an issue with this or that I disagree with that. And they are supposed to note that. And I see that, you know, often in IEPs that the parent disagrees or the parent feels this child needs X, Y, and Z. And so that way it's documented that you had concerns, you tried to raise them, and that can help if you end up having to take the next steps, which I will, you know, talk about in the next couple of slides. But you don't have to agree with the special education recommendations. So if everything goes well, you won't need me necessarily, you know, if you feel like the IEP developed is appropriate and you go and visit whatever placements are offered and it looks like it'll be a safe environment, therapeutic environment for your child, then there's really no need to necessarily disagree. You give it a shot and see how that works. And so oftentimes that can be the advice that I give families, like, you know what, it kind of looks like a solid IEP. You know, you didn't tell me there was anything glaring when you went to visit the school, if they're still giving visits. I know certain schools have, you know, COVID policies. But if it's the opposite, if you walk out of that, you know, virtual IEP meeting and you're like, oh my goodness, I really felt like I wasn't heard. I really am concerned that they're not recommending this particular therapy that his doctor is recommending. You just know that you don't have to agree to the services. This plays into kind of the consent confidentiality slide, but more so this plays into kind of moving forward what rights parents have when they do disagree. So issues of least restrictive environment, this is embedded in all of the laws covering special education, from the federal down to the local, you know, regulations. Your child has the right to be educated in the least restrictive environment, the least restrictive environment in which he or she can learn. So that's really the qualifier is, you know, a parent may want their child in a general education setting, but we have to think about what is the least restrictive in which that child can really meaningfully access the learning and education. And, you know, there's a whole continuum, you know, from general education all the way through home and hospital instruction is like the most restrictive. In between is where we have, you know, some District 75 schools. We have, you know, day programs that are state approved, residential programs as well. And, you know, this is an important piece. I've been, I think as times are changing and society is looking more progressively at the issue of integrating children with disabilities with children who don't have learning differences, or, you know, maybe not identified learning differences. I am seeing more often some families asking, you know, for the child to be in some sort of inclusion setting. And I know the DOE has or is piloting certain programs with that regard. But in terms of knowing your rights, it's, you know, least restrictive environment is a pretty important one. I think it really stems from back in the 70s, where when these laws came about, the you know, special education grew out of the civil rights movement, you know, racial segregation and integration. And then the disability rights groups started popping up and saying, well, what about us? You know, we've been segregated as well. And, you know, being close to home is a consideration. Interacting with typically developing children is a consideration. You know, proximity, the zone school, your local community school. And so you're kind of in the position as a parent of thinking, well, going along the continuum, at which point is it that my child is in the least restrictive environment? And, you know, all of those considerations, also the size, the class ratios are embedded in this concept of, you know, making sure that the child is not unnecessarily placed in a special class with only other children with IEPs. So the independent educational evaluation, this is a big one, at least in my practice. You have the right to disagree with your child's evaluation each time an evaluation is conducted. And the evaluations are important because those are what serve the basis usually of the IEP developed. And so if your child had a bad day or series of bad days, or you just felt like the evaluator's report doesn't quite capture your child and how you view your child and your child's needs, you have the right to disagree. And I think that this is actually a really powerful tool, advocacy tool and litigation tool in our toolbox for parents who are, you know, looking for something different than what the district may be offering. You can think of an independent evaluation as a second opinion. Like if you went to a doctor, you got a diagnosis and you're like, well, I need a second opinion. And you can think of it in that way. And that second opinion has to be discussed and brought to the CSC, you know, and to determine whether changes need to be made to the IEP. So independent means that it's a non-DOE employee. It'll be at, you know, publicly funded at the DOE's expense. And if you find the right provider, that independent evaluator can actually clarify certain diagnoses. Like sometimes I have families that are, I think my child might be dyslexic, or I think my child has ADHD, but they just never had the means to kind of narrow down or rule out certain diagnoses. In certain cases, an independent neuropsychological evaluation can do that. And from an advocacy standpoint, I like the independent evaluations because they usually come with recommendations for strategies and teaching methodologies that would be effective for your child. So unlike sometimes the evaluations we see from school districts, where there's an analysis of the child's testing results and functioning levels, at the end, usually those evaluations say, you know, and we defer recommendations to the CSC, you know, to determine what IEP services may be available. With the independent evaluations, you get recommendations like your child needs ABA, or your child needs an extended year program, you know, or your child has autism and ADHD and needs compensatory education. So it is a sometimes overlooked but very powerful tool. So I wanted to throw in here some special education rights with respect to being disciplined. And I don't know how often this is happening in the District 75 network, but you know, to the extent a child is suspended for a period longer than 10 days or has been suspended cumulatively for a period for more than 10 school days, there should be a superintendent's suspension hearing whenever school is seeking a long-term suspension, or it's called a long-term suspension. And if your child has a disability or being suspected of having a disability, there should be what's called an MDR. We call that here in New York City the manifestation determination review, which should look like an IEP meeting where the team is looking at the alleged misconduct and in relation to your child's disability, and determining whether there's like a substantial relationship between the two, because the idea is that your child shouldn't be punished for behaviors or conduct that's pretty much out of their control. And the MDR, if it's done properly, should be an opportunity where that the committee decides to move beyond punishment, but also tweaking the IEP and considering changes to the behavior intervention plan, or for the first time doing a functional behavior assessment. So that all of that happens if things are done the way they should be done. Your child does have the right to IEP services during long-term suspensions, and that's always something that is may not happen, I guess. It's hard to kind of recreate a special education classroom when a child is on suspension, but there is, in terms of your rights, an expedited impartial hearing process. It's a process that should, from start to finish, be completed within 30 days, where you can appeal sort of the MDR results. So if the result is that they say there's no nexus, there's no connection between your child's, having ADHD and pushing a child, near a window, then there are things that you can do to appeal. One of them is this expedited due process hearing with respect to the suspension, and also the receipt of services during the suspension. So due process. So this is like a very charged legal term, but essentially I describe it as, if your child has this legal right to an appropriate education in New York State. It's a constitutional right to be educated under the New York State Constitution. And before a government entity, such as a school district, can violate your rights or impedes on this right, you have the right to challenge it. And so that's kind of what due process is all about. There are different ways in which a parent can, disagree and challenge and ask for something else. The simplest way is really the reevaluation. Some parents say, I think my child really needs a paraprofessional. This is ridiculous. I'm getting called every day to pick up the child, and yet they keep denying me the paraprofessional, and now I'm going to lose my job because I can't go to work, that whole thing. And, I always say, well, try and get some letter and support from an outside provider before you ask to reopen the case. But that is, one of the like a starting point, I think, in terms of advocating for your child. There's mediation. Again, like each of these could be its own PowerPoint presentation, but that is supposed to be a non-adversarial process in which both sides get together with a neutral person, the mediator, to try and come to an agreement on what changes to be made. We usually don't see anything that involves private funding, private schools, private tuition, or tutoring, or ABA services that cannot really be addressed in the mediation, because the individual sent to represent the DOE often doesn't have that legal authority to bind the the DOE to fund things of that nature. A state complaint is good for alleged violations of patterns and practices, or just an overall violation of your child's rights beyond what, the individualized, services you want your child to receive, but to just let the state know, like, well, this is what they're doing, and this is what the school district's doing, and it's a violation, and the state comes and does an investigation and interviews both sides, and then comes up with a finding of whether or not the district has violated or is violating special education laws. The impartial hearing is really where I practice the most, because that is the most targeted venue for your child's needs, where you're not kind of limited to only changes within the IEP, but it can go beyond that to things like private compensatory education funding, and private school potentially, and after school services. So I see my slide. Okay, I hope you guys can see the whole thing, but compensatory education, since I've, been doing this virtually since the pandemic, this is huge. It's still huge. I still see, when I'm reviewing records, IEPs, where the child is not, there's documented, evidence that the child didn't really access the remote learning for a whole variety of reasons: disability, age, behavior, lack of someone who can facilitate that. So it's important to note in New York City that the statute of limitations has been told, meaning it's kind of like the clock stopped between March 2020 and November 2020. This is very technical, but typically a parent only has 2 years to raise concerns about their child's education. So the information I'm putting forth here, which is not necessarily legal advice, is get your claims in before November 2022 because of that 2-year statute of limitations. If you're looking for makeup services to make up for past denials of FAPE, of the free appropriate education. With compensatory education, there's quantitative approaches and qualitative approaches. By quantitative, I've done cases where it is, the parents like, my child missed 50 seconds of, 50 sessions of speech, and I want all 50 sessions back. Qualitative approach is more thinking as a whole. When my child didn't really access remote learning by the special ed teacher over the course of 2 or 3 years, so I want to make up for that. And I think that having private sets by an ABA trained teacher is what my child needs to make up for that deficit. So again, all of this is a lot that can be addressed in its own PowerPoint, but I just wanted to touch on all of it. And now, beyond after school beyond compensatory education, which is really specifically to make up for past denials of FAPE, there are kids who just automatically, somewhat automatically, need the after school services. So a child's school day doesn't necessarily need to end at 2:30 when they get on the bus to go home. I have a lot of clients who have additional support, as long as, it works for the family, in terms of their childcare arrangements and dynamics, to have an outside provider, funded by the Department of Education, come in and work on all of these skills, toileting, communication, self-regulation. For my older kids, travel training and community skills. Under the law, the standard is that it has to be like necessary. It has to be like a necessary component of the child's special education program, so that without it, the child won't make progress. So it is a pretty, high standard to meet. But when you think about the possibilities of, instead of coming home and dealing with your child yourself, along with all, if you have other children or other work obligations, you can have a trained individual, free of cost, coming in and helping with all of these skills to transfer them over. And I, most commonly see it, with ABA, the Applied Behavior Analysis for the children on the spectrum. And then private school tuition, this is like the most complex of the, remedies or relief that parents have available in terms of the advocacy and litigation involved, but I did want to bring it up. So you essentially are kind of thinking like, is my child one of those children who just doesn't quite fit into the special class ratios that are offered? Is my child, not quite a 12:1, but 8:1, would it fit for him, or are they somewhat in between some of these, in between a 12:1 in a community school versus a larger class, inclusion class in a District 75 program? So these are all kind of the conversations that are had, at least between myself and parents, where they feel like they want to take this step and look outside of the public school system. Does your child require a particular teaching methodology? So like my clients with dyslexia, which is now called like a specific reading disorder in, it's specific learning disability in reading, or in Gillingham or Wilson reading or methodologies. Of course, there's ABA for autism, floor time, just different teaching methodologies that may not be fully present and utilized in your child's current school. But if you do have that evidence that your child really requires this, either through an outside evaluation or a medical report, that could be something that can add to a case for funding. And there are two different types of private schools. There are the ones that are approved by New York State. They're called sometimes NPS, non-public schools, which the DOE through their central base support team can identify if they do kind of go through this analysis and feel like there's no public school that can meet this child's needs. And then there are non-state approved independent schools that are out there that target different disabilities, and a lot of them are in Manhattan, a few in Brooklyn, more popping up in Queens, very few in the Bronx. Unfortunately, there's one. No, I don't think there's one, at least a non-state approved independent school in Staten Island. But there are schools out there, and families sometimes come across, they start Googling like, autism school or dyslexia school. And some of these schools will pop up, and, that kind of kickstarts the research that the parent has. So I know I went over my time. There was extensive discussion about transition planning. In terms of your right, the whole goal is to have your child be able to lead as productive a life as possible after high school. The vocational assessments should be happening at around age 12, the transition planning, that IEP in which that school year where the child's turning 15. Your child also has the right to start to be invited to attend these meetings if you feel that is what is appropriate in those circumstances. And I've done cases for private transition services. If you feel like your child needs more than what's offered, there is potentially, ABA type or, private agencies that can, take on that role after school of doing the travel training and vocational training. And then lastly, your child's eligible, as long as he or she hasn't graduated with a diploma, eligible for an IEP until they're 21. And that's it. And this is my contact information. I'm sorry for going over, but I'm, ready to take any questions.
This was very valuable information. Do we have anyone that wants to raise their hand for a question? I checked the chat. There isn't anything so far. I do have a question while we wait for a question. Could you explain the necessity or why it would be good to have the special needs trust funds?
Yes, absolutely. So I think it becomes more important as the child is growing up and reaching that transition into adulthood. So now, like through OPWDDs, like there are different waivers. For example, the parent's income can be kind of taken out of the equation in terms of how, whether the child would qualify for like, Medicaid services. And I think the importance with the special needs trust is like if your child does end up having some income or inheritance, something that would impact their eligibility for income-based government assistance like Medicaid or I think SSI, I guess, other food stamps, things of that nature, that putting that kind of like just thinking of it in a very like simplistic way is like putting that excess income away so that it's not shown when the government is, whatever agency is looking like, okay, how much, in assets does this individual have, can enable the child to qualify for, those government benefits that are needed for their, survival. And at the same time, still have access through the trustee for, their care through the special needs trust. So, special needs planning, it's important, especially as, we enter into those transition years, the teenage years, and, being practical and thinking like, well, yes, my child, you think like child's always going to live under my roof and I'm going to be able to take care of all of their needs, but then what happens if that's not the case, and we never know what. So it's almost like trying to be able to set the child up to, when you're not capable of being their everything and primary caregiver. And, it's a separate legal process. The child for special needs or supplemental trust, there is a certification. There has to be a medical certification, I think, by 2 different doctors certifying the developmental disability. And the trustee or the proposed, trustee has to, the family members have to be notified also that this is happening so that they potentially have a voice or a say, and the appropriateness of whoever ends up being designated. There's the succession planning of like what happens after that individual with a disability passes on, and who ends up being that contingent beneficiary. And there was a case actually that I had looked at fairly recently where a judge said that this particular young woman didn't need kind of like the type of guardianship over property and person that her mother was seeking to have under her, and said that this was a child who, not a child, no longer a child, but a young adult who had the means to manage these financial aspects of her life without kind of the guardianship and that comes with some of this transition planning. So it's something to families should be thinking about and preparing for. I think it's becomes most urgent as the child is getting older, but for a number of things. For example, I had a client where the parents were suing kind of like a malpractice at the time of birth, that the child lost oxygen and ended up, I guess, being diagnosed with a particular disability. And I remember talking to this parent about, if she does, win in a settlement or in court, the money, that's, and she was like, she was going to put it in a special needs trust, and that was how she was going to, be able to protect her child, moving forward. And this was even a young, this was like a toddler. So she was already kind of, planning ahead, like, this money, wasn't going to be, for her and her husband to start spending or whatever they were going to do, but to kind of save, put it aside, and then it wouldn't impact him as he gets older and needs access to some of these, government assistance.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I do want to make sure we get to Audrey's hand. Audrey, if you can unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Perfect. So I know all of our children, we lost so much time because of the pandemic. Is there any possibility for DOE or the state, I don't know how it would work, to extend the age to maybe 22, opposed to trying to get back compensatory time and compensatory related services that were missed during the pandemic?
I know there was some advocacy around that. I remember seeing things maybe in definitely 2020 and also 2021 last year about extending a child's eligibility for special education services. So if they were in that category of turning 21 in that particular school year, but understanding that they missed out on a whole bunch of education, but it's compensatory education. It can allow a child to benefit or to receive special education services beyond the period of eligibility. And so that was always the case, even before COVID, was that, okay, just because you're 21, things are supposed to stop, right? At some point, education is done. But if there are still claims, if there were still claims within the past, the most recent 2 school years or calendar years, however you want to think about it, then parents were still allowed to bring a claim and say that. So in terms of a not necessarily a policy shift, but a statutory shift to extend that time, to say 22 years old instead of 21. I don't foresee that happening at this point. I think, to change the law just requires a lot of steps. And so I think even if it can happen, I don't think it's, definitely not for the kids that are, 21 or 20 years old right now. I don't see that being feasible, just knowing the state of, laws and Albany and things like that, the politics of it. But from just a pure special ed perspective, if a potential client came to me and said they felt like, over the past 2 school years, their child has, made either minimal progress, didn't get the services on the IEP, or the services on the IEP were inappropriate to begin with, there's still a viable claim for it. But it's going to look different. I mean, I don't know if they're going to have, a hearing officer will say this 22-year-old or 23-year-old should sit in the high school that they were attending before, but it may just be like a bank of hours that I see that, more commonly of, well, here's some private tutoring and this is going to help you move on to the next stage of what your post-secondary life, and then that is what would be ordered.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions for Ms. MP Reynolds? Thank you for your time and this presentation and just giving to the community. It is really something awesome. We're going to make sure that we have this online, but I do want to double check, does any other attendee have a question for Ms. MP Reynolds? No, well, we do have one final question for Ms. Wright, one of the panelists that we didn't get a chance to get to. Could you tell us about some of the signs that a parent might be looking for or need to be aware of when it comes to their child in ADHD or ASD, and what may be, if something doesn't seem typical for their age range, what are some of the things that they should be looking out for behavior-wise?
Sure. So that's for me, right? Not Miss Wright.
That one actually is for Miss Wright.
Oh, okay. Because I could just speak from my client's perspective, but Miss Wright, I know.
If you can jump in on a little bit of that too, I would love.
All right, I could finally, can you guys hear me now? Because I was
Yes.
unmuted. All right, who would you like to say, to answer?
What are the signs to be aware of when a child is having behaviors that would not seem typical for their age range?
Do you want Miss Reynolds to answer or me? I don't know.
You can lead that up, Rebecca.
Okay, I can lead it out. Well, I will say this, I always go towards the tantrums. A lot of people would say there are that tantruming and being cranky and wanting their way and being rigid could be normal to a certain extent. However, when we talk about the diagnosis, we're talking about longer periods of time. So you'll have children that have a diagnosis, they'll say, oh, that's typical, but then the children that have the diagnosis, it's beyond the normal time. So the tantrums are happening more frequently, longer in duration. It's a little bit more intense than a typical developing child. So I'll start with the tantrums. Also, you might have children that, they might be, well, they're shy. Well, they're shy, and then there is some signs where you notice that there's avoidance of eye contact or wanting to play alone, or just really avoiding any type of social contact with any child. Or I've heard this, boys, it takes a little bit longer for the boys to start talking. I've heard pediatricians say that. And again, when I mentioned in my presentation, just, some healthcare providers are still learning a lot more about autism. And I did some research that a lot of them are not following the checklist. They're not following through with the screening that they should, but that's another topic. But to say that a child, oh, well, boys, or he's a little delayed, he'll come and he'll catch up later on. It's different when the developmental milestones are not being hit in the sense of communication and the communication piece. So these are things to look out for. Just know that it's a little bit more extreme, a little bit more longer and exaggerated in the behaviors and it's beyond the typical time.
Okay, thank you so much. Miss MP Reynolds, you wanted to touch on that or? Yeah,
just very quickly, because I know I had for another group, I had done a presentation about, the warning signs and why your child may actually need an IEP. So just really briefly, the standard is if there's an adverse impact on your child's educational performance. So a decline in grades, a change in their mood or mental health status, irritability, if they're having difficulty concentrating, school phobia, being fearful of getting out of the house when they know they have to go to school, very general, social and behavioral difficulties, difficulty keeping up with their classmates, of course, complaints from teachers, that's always a red flag. And then any, increase in disciplinary infractions. And then if supports that are already available, like AIS, academic intervention services, I know it's called something different now, if those things aren't working, these are all, I think, signs that perhaps getting an evaluation will help clarify what's happening.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Before we end our conference with our acknowledgements, I do want to let everyone know this information and these sessions will be on our website. Resources will be sent out to the people that attended. It will also be available on ccd75.org. Everything that you need. If you just want to go to the website, we should possibly have that up and working before Monday. That is the goal. I do want to say thank you to all of the presenters and for your time. And I do want to take the space to thank the people that helped pull this together. And with that being said, I want to toss it over for acknowledgements to Amy Ming Tsai, my co-chair for Outreach.
Thank you, Christy. And it was an honor to work with Christy as well in the planning stage and preparation, alongside our other council members, Christy Montalvan and Constance Isudu, who we all worked really diligently to make sure that this conference was well resourced and from the great presenters here who have great knowledge from their professional and personal experiences. And then also to our entire council for making sure that this conference will work and run efficiently today on a Saturday. So we just wanted to acknowledge our presenters who took the time to create their deck and also preparation for being here today and staying on. Ryan Grimes, who is a certified pediatric nurse practitioner who has expressed her experiences through students and families through their journey. And Rebecca Wright from Right Way Care, Lala Yusubuva, apologize again, who's the executive director of Spark Kids. Thank you for sharing your program and expressing the need for our community, and hopefully we'll get more services for this program. And from Wendy, who is, I apologize, Wendy, who's from Adapt Community Network, and Francis from Manhattan Transition and Access Center, and lastly, Orona from Legals. I apologize, I'm reading from a script. MSR Legal and Consulting Services. Appreciate all of you being here and staying on.
Don't forget the survey. Don't forget the survey.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much, Craig. So please complete the post conference survey. Give us a little bit of feedback as to what you like, what can be improved, what maybe next time we can add to our conferences, and really hope that we can continue. This is actually our first. And we see a wealth of knowledge that our families are getting. We hope that they really enjoyed and be empowered, that you're not alone in this journey with your child and your family, but there are support teams here. And there's lots of people here also can connect you to other organizations and agencies. So we will have our survey linked in the chat as well as on our website, ccd75.org. And please also follow us on our social media platforms on Facebook, Twitter, and if I'm missing one, Christy, please add. And we'll also share all the information. Great. And then we'll share all this information. And we know that, you know, families unfortunately today weren't able to participate here because there's so many things going on around the city. So you would have an opportunity to view the clips of every session on our website. Christy will get that out to you soon. And again, I know there was some technical things that happened earlier, but thank you for just following us through the end of this. And we will stay on. If anybody wanted just leave their information in the chat box or questions or just need a little guidance, we're here, we're gonna stay on, but please take the beautiful day to enjoy with your families and stay hydrated with water and grab a snack. We know we've been here for a while and we will be back for another conference soon. So thank you so much and good afternoon now.
Yes, thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Mr. Spencer, did you have anything that you wanted to add or?
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this coming Wednesday evening, our council will be leading, along with 3 other parent bodies, the superintendent candidate town hall. Start at 7:15 to 9:15 p.m. Please email our council, d75council@schools.nyc.gov. If you didn't get the link, it's not through us, it's through the DOE. But we have 2 candidates. There's questions. There'll be questions from the chat that the candidates will have to stay to field. So please, and this is the work that it took a lot of work. We need to get this to you to empower you. So please be on the lookout for that. Christy, I'll work with you offline to make sure that that connection is, because we don't have the connection. We don't own it. We didn't make it. Our next council meeting, our joint meeting is June 15th. That's the last one of the year. There's several things will be going on. We'll hopefully, cross our fingers, have some information more on summer instruction. And we're trying to set up a meeting to get more information to give you. There'll be wrap-ups of this and other events. So yeah, the most important thing is Wednesday night, 7:15. Superintendent candidate town hall. Get it. It's about 20-25 minutes for you guys to ask questions in the chat. So please pass that around. We'll get that out as much as we can. Thank you so much.
Well, guess I need to unmute. With that being said, thank you again. Thank you very much, Amy Ming-Sai, my co-chair, for all of the council members that have supported today. I did see Patricia Hewitt, Celia, Joanne, Craig.
Aisha, she came in. Thank you.
Aisha, yes. Aisha is here as well. So thank you once again. Do expect to watch these online. And if you need anything else, please feel free to reach out to our council. The council email is d75council@schools.gov.
Schools.nyc.gov.
.nyc.gov. Thank you so much. All righty, everyone, have a great day. And
Stay
thank you.
safe, everybody. God bless.
Afternoon.
We staying on. We're good. Oh,
Yeah,
I want to start the recording.
a brief second.